Hello, welcome back to the channel. I thought we'd do something different, and because Percy Jackson and the Olympians is getting a Disney Plus series in a couple of years, is currently in the works, I thought I could get everyone caught up by reading the books. So I will be doing that. Finished, audiobook. I'll be going through one chapter a day, maybe more, however I'm feeling. But yeah, so sit back, relax, and if you have the books, follow along if you want, or if you're just looking for something to fill the empty void in your life of you being alone, like me, then yeah. So, without further ado, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Look, I don't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think that you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom and dad told you about your birth and try to live a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. If you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once they know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 23 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading from the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Bruner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Bruner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard, with a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told us stories and jokes and let's play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so it was the only teacher's class that put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least, I hoped that for once I couldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school, when we went to the Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon, and I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course, I got exploded anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour at the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk in a classical unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bullifit, the freckly, red-headed, decapitomatic girl hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwiches. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried whenever he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and sort of wispy beard on his chin. On top of that, he was crippled. He had no season of PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Auntie Bubblefit was throwing Waz's sandwich and that stuck in its curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm gonna kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged on the piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know I get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bullfoot right then and there, and school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was getting myself into. Mr. Bruno led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my stuff this stuff had survived for 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with this big sphinx on top. He started telling us how his grave marker, a stele, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the side. I was trying to listen to what they had to say, because it was kind of interesting. But everyone around me was talking, and every time I told him to shut up, the other chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was a little math teacher from Georgia, who always wore a black leather jacket even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She came to Nancy halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Bubblefoot and figured I was a devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," in a real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school attention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase erasers out of old math books until midnight, I took over. I didn't think Miss Dodds was human. She looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Bruner could talk about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bubblefoot sniggered something about the naked guy on the steel, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Bruner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Bruner pointed to one of the pictures on the steel. "Perhaps you'd tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving. I felt a flush of relief, because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Bruner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because, well, I don't remember. Kronos was the king god, and God?" Mr. Bruner asked. "Titan," I said to myself. "And he can trust his kids who were the gods, so Kronos ate them, right? But his wife had baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he gave his dad Kronos and took off up his brother and sisters." "Ew!" someone that goes behind me. And so there was a big fight between the gods and Titans. I continued. And the gods won. Some thinkers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bubblefoot, my middle friend. "Like, we're actually going to use this in life. Sounds like it's actually going to be on job applications. Please explain why Kronos ate his kids." "And why, Mr. Jackson?" Bruno said. To paraphrase Miss Bubblefoot's asking question, "Does this matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter than her red hair. At least Nancy got pat, too. Mr. Bruner was the only one ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Bruner looked disappointed. "Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being mortal gods, had been living and grown up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him into pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest player of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, will you lead us back outside?" The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, and the guys pushing each other around acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Bruner said, "Mr. Jackson?" I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going, then I turned to Mr. Bruner. "Sir?" Mr. Bruner had the look that wouldn't let you go, intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. "You must know the answer to my question," Mr. Bruner told me. "About Titans?" "About real life, and how your studies apply to it." "Oh. What you learn from me," he said, "is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I'll only say the best for you, Percy Jackson." I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when we dressed up in the suit of Roman armor and shouted, "What ho!" and challenged us, sword pointing against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who ever lived and their mother and what god they worshipped. Mr. Bruner expected me to be as good as everybody else. Thought I had dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, and I never been above a C- in my life. No, he just expected me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much as spell them correctly. I mumbled about trying harder, while Mr. Bruner took one long sound look at the steel, like Bandit's ghost funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along 5th Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We had massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if there was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchables crackers. Nancy Bubblefoot was trying to pickpocket something from old lady's purse, and of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that if we did that, everyone wouldn't know we're from that school, the school for loser freaks who didn't make it elsewhere. "Detention?" Grover asked. "Nah," I said. "Not from Bruner. He used to lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius." Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment. "You feel better?" he said. "Never apple." I don't have much of an appetite, so I'm going to take it. I watched a stream of cabs going down 5th Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, a little ways uptown from where I sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me, be glad to see me, but she was disappointed too. She sent me right back to Yancey, remind me that if I tried harder, even this was my 6th school in 6 years, I was probably going to be kicked out again. I wasn't able to stand the sad look she'd give me. Mr. Bruner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair and looked like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Buffett approved ugly friends, and I guess she got tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange as if someone had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor had told me a million times, count to 10, get control of your temper. But I was so my blank, a wave roared in my ears. I remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain, screaming, Percy pushed me! Mrs. Dodge retired was next to us. Suddenly was whispering, did you see? The water. Like it grabbed her. I don't know what they're talking about. All I knew was I was in trouble again. As soon as Mrs. Dodge made sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising to get a new t-shirt in the museum, gift shop, etc., etc., Mrs. Dodge turned on me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I done something she'd been waiting for all semester. Now, honey, I know, I grumbled. I'm not erasing workbooks. That wasn't the right thing to say. Come with me, Mrs. Dodge said. Wait, Grover yelped. It was me. I pushed her. I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Dodge scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard his whiskey chin troubled. I don't think so, Mr. Underwood, she said. But you will stay here. Grover looked at me desperately. It's okay, man, I told him. Thanks for trying. Honey, Mrs. Buck barked at me. Now. Nancy Bullfit smirked. Give her my deluxe I'll kill you later stare. Then I turned to face Miss Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way at the top of the steps, gesturing painfully for me to come on. How'd you get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot, when my brain falls asleep or something, and the next thing I know, I miss something. It's a puzzle piece fell out of the universe, and staring a blank piece behind it. The school cat told me it's part of my ADHD. My brain misinterpreted things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Miss Dodds. Halfway up the steps, I glanced at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Bruner, like he wanted Mr. Bruner to notice what was going on, but Mr. Bruner was over his novel. I looked back up. Mrs. Dodds disappeared again. She was now outside the building at the entrance hall. Okay, I thought. She's going to buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. But apparently that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Mrs. Dodds stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making this weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being able to teach her, especially Mrs. Dodds. Some of the way she looked at the frieze, I just wanted to pulverize it. You've been giving us problems, honey, she said. I did the safe thing. I said, yes, ma'am. She tugged on the cuffs of her leather jacket. Did you really think you get away with it? She looked in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's going to hurt me. She said, I'll try harder, ma'am. Thunder shook the building. We're not fools, Percy Jackson, Mrs. Dawes said. It was only a matter of time before we found out. Confess, and suffer less pain. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was the teacher must have found the illegal stash of candy I was selling out of my dorm room. Or maybe they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book, and I was going to get my grade. Or worse, when we could read the book. Well, she demanded. Ma'am, I don't... Your time is up, she hissed. Then the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turned into talons. Her jacket melted into huge leather wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs. She was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Bruner, who'd been outside the room a minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. What ho, Percy, he shouted, tossed the pen through the air. Miss Dodge looked at me. With a yelp, I dodged and felt talons across the air next to my ear. I snatched a ballpoint pen out of the air, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Bruner's bronze sword, which she always used on tournament day. Mrs. Bond spun toward me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, Die, honey! Then she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. The only thing came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her in the shoulder and passed clean through her body as she made of water. Hiss! Mrs. Dodds was a sandcastle in a powder fan. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech and the chill of evil in the air, as those two glowing eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Bruno wasn't there. Nobody there was but me. My hands were still trembling. I was supposed to be contaminated with magic mushrooms or something. Can I imagine the whole thing? I went back outside. It started to rain. Grover looked at something I found in the museum map, tented over his head. Mr. Buffett was still standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her elite friends. Would you tell me? I said, I hope Mrs. Kira with your butt. I said, who? Our teacher. Duh. I blinked. I know she's named Mrs. Kerr. I guess that's what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Mrs. Dawes was. He said, who? But he paused first and went looking at me, so I thought he was messing with me. Not funny, man, I told him. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Bruner with his red umbrella. reading this book as if he never moved. I went over to him, looked up a little distracted. Ah, that would be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson.
Right. Let's do it.
He messing with me. Not funny, man, I told him. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Bruner sitting with his red umbrella, reading his book as he never moved. I went over to him, looked up a little distracted. Ah, that would be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson. I handed Mr. Bruner his pen. I didn't even realize I was still holding it. Sir, I said, where's Mrs. Dodds? He said to me blankly, Who? You're the chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, the pre-algebra teacher? He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. Percy, there's no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there's never been a Mrs. Dodds at Nancy Academy. Are you feeling all right? And that was the first chapter. My dad came in and said we had to move furniture around because we're getting new carpet. That was what you heard in the middle, so I paused through all of that. I'm sorry. That's the end of the first chapter. Tomorrow we'll be doing the second chapter. Maybe the third. Who knows? Maybe we'll even do 3. But I'm feeling good about it. Remember, you keep reading if you want. I don't care. Bye.